Chapter 1, New World Encounters. During the 16th century, the Spanish, French, and English explored the Americas, displaced Native American cultures, and established colonies in the Western Hemisphere. These changes forced both cultures to adapt and change, though Native American cultures often suffered the most in these early exchanges. Native American histories before conquest. Humans occupied parts of the Western Hemisphere thousands of years before European discovery of America. The Mayans, Toltecs, and the Aztecs in Central and South America created societies at least as sophisticated as that of the Europeans while along the Atlantic coast. Native Americans formed diverse and mobile communities of hunters and gatherers. The arrival of Europeans in the New World brought into contact the three very different worlds of Europe, Africa, and America. The clashes that arose between the many Native American cultures and European cultures after 1492 often resulted in individual and tribal extermination. Many Native Americans who were not killed in battle died as a result of deadly diseases brought to the Americas by the European newcomers. The environmental challenge, food, climate, and culture. Environmental conditions played a monumental role in the story of America and her original settlers. Global warming ended the Ice Age, allowing Native American cultures to expand their populations and territorial habitations. As populations expanded, food sources changed, forcing Native American cultures to adapt as well. Soon they developed semi-agricultural societies of considerable sophistication and technological development. Though scholars are not in total agreement, most acknowledge that at least 4 million Native Americans lived north of Mexico at the time of the initial encounter with Europeans. Mysterious disappearances. There remains today powerful evidence of the culture and social achievements of Native peoples before European contact. Though many of them, especially in the Southwest and the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys in North America, had disappeared just before the arrival of the Europeans. Archaeological data of the Anasazi culture that was concentrated in the Chaco Canyon on the San Juan River in present-day New Mexico reveal a highly developed society possessing an intricate highway system, a technologically sophisticated network of irrigation canals, and complex apartment-like housing structure. Aztec dominance. The Aztecs, an aggressive, warlike people, conquered the other peoples of central Mexico, developing a complex and successful empire shortly before Columbus began his first journeys across the Atlantic. In 1519, Tenochtitlan, the center of the Aztec culture, contained as many as 250,000 inhabitants. Eastern woodland cultures. Along the northeast Atlantic coast and into the eastern Great Lake region, Native Americans formed diverse and relatively mobile communities who subsisted by supplementing farming with seasonal hunting and gathering. Despite sharing similar cultural values and assumptions and common linguistic roots, these Native Americans developed varied dialects, making communication difficult and alliances uncommon. A world transformed. Native Americans were profoundly changed by the arrival of the Europeans, though such a change occurred at different rates across the continent. As their daily lives changed, Native Americans found that they had to develop new ways to survive. They often participated in mutually beneficial trading arrangements with the Europeans, who typically misunderstood Native ways, sparking social conflicts that were often violent. While some adopted European religions, others tenaciously held on to their own worldviews. Cultural negotiations. Early Native Americans and European encounters had to overcome communication problems as well as cultural conflicts. But Native people were not passive victims of force beyond their control. They made choices that suited their needs and desires, resisting most aspects of European culture, but readily accepting certain European material goods. The benefit of iron tools were easily seen, while most Native Americans' Christianity was irrelevant to their needs. Native peoples' resistance to European efforts at civilizing them caused many settlers to perceive Indians as mostly obstacles to settlement. Threats to survival, trade, and disease. European trade goods quickly became part of Native American material culture, and their efforts to gather furs for trade for these goods altered the ecological balance of much of the New World. This dependence also caused increasing conflict between Indians and Europeans, as well as between different tribal groups. Despite the problem caused by Native Americans' increasingly dependency on European trade goods, it was disease that ultimately destroyed the cultural integrity of many tribes. Some areas suffered a 90 to 95% population loss within the first century of European contact. The death of so many natives resulted in a loss of indigenous cultural traditions and set in motion the search for a substitute labor force in Africa. West Africa, ancient and complex societies. A variety of intricate and sophisticated cultures dominated sub-Saharan West Africa at the time of the European colonization of the New World. Complicated trade routes stretched across the African continent, tying together diverse cultures. The Portuguese explored the coast of West Africa and began trading in slaves, beginning the massive forced migration of black Africans to the Americas. Europe on the eve of conquest. Except for a brief settlement by the Vikings in 984, Europe was unprepared to tackle transatlantic exploration until the 16th century, when rapidly changing conditions led to the discovery, exploration, and conquest of the Americas. Building new nation-states. At the end of the latter Middle Ages, strong monarchs centralized power, forming modern nation-states. The Renaissance fostered a more expansive outlook, inspiring bold and creative thinking, and the invention of the printing press aided in the spread of new ideas and new technologies in Europe. Imagining a new world. By 1500, Spain had become a leading world power. The marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella led to the unification of Spain through a holy war known as the Reconquista. Not long after unification, and well before the Spanish reached the New World, conquistadors, men motivated by their desire for personal glory and gain and their loyalty to God and Spain, conquered the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean, setting a precedent of subjugation that they would replicate in the Americas. Myths and realities. Though his goal was to establish a western route to Asia, Christopher Columbus led the way for Spain to discover and establish the largest colonial empire in the New World. The conquistadors' faith and greed. Once in the New World, the strong and independent conquistadors led the Spanish in securing their colonial empire by first concentrating on the major islands of the Americas and finally conquering Montezuma and the Aztec Empire in Mexico.